The night my family accused me of marrying for money, they had no idea I already owned more than the man I was marrying. They thought they were exposing me. They were about to expose themselves. Stay with me, because what happened 6 months later at my father's retirement gala ended every lie they'd built about me. My name is Naomi Carter. At 31, I was labeled the opportunist of the family, the climber, the social strategist, the daughter who secured her future instead of earning it. That's what they whispered the week I got engaged. My fiancé, Adrian Vale, was a venture capitalist, well-known, reserved, dangerously private, and very wealthy. To my parents, that was the only part that mattered. They didn't ask how we met. They didn't ask what we built together. They saw headlines and bank statements, and they decided I had finally revealed who I really was. What they didn't know was that I had invested in Adrian's first fund years before we ever dated, quietly, strategically, under a different holding name. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the dinner where it started. My parents hosted an intimate celebration the week after our engagement. 40 guests, extended family, a few business acquaintances, enough witnesses to make a statement. My father waited until dessert. He always waits. He tapped his glass, smiled, and said, "I suppose congratulations are in order." Polite laughter. Then he looked at me. "You always did have an eye for stability, Naomi." The tone was soft, but the room understood. My aunt leaned in loudly. "Well, she's certainly upgraded." My cousin laughed. "Guess student loans won't be a problem now." Adrian stayed calm. He squeezed my hand under the table. I felt his pulse steady. Mine wasn't. My mother tilted her head. "We just hope you're marrying for the right reasons." That line, that implication, that judgment disguised as concern. I smiled, because I'd learned something important years ago. Never argue when people are underestimating you. Let them finish. The accusations didn't stop that night. They multiplied. Group chats, side comments, carefully phrased advice. My brother sent me an article about financial dependency in modern marriages. My mother asked if we'd signed a prenup to protect Adrian. Protect him from me. No one asked about my portfolio. No one asked how I paid off my mortgage at 28, because none of that fit the narrative they preferred. I met Adrian 5 years before the engagement, not at a gala, not at a conference, but in a shared investor round for a failing biotech startup. He was cautious. I was analytical. We disagreed on valuation. I was right. He remembered that. Over the next 2 years, we co-invested quietly, small checks, smart bets. One of those bets became a breakthrough clean energy storage company. My stake was larger than his, significantly larger. He never announced that publicly. I never needed him to. By the time we started dating, I wasn't stepping into his world. We were standing on overlapping ground. But my family didn't see that. They saw headlines, and they assumed I had attached myself to it. The engagement dinner was only the beginning. The real insult came 3 weeks later. My father requested a private meeting, just the two of us. His office smelled like leather and control. He didn't waste time. "Are you financially protected if this ends?" he asked. I stared at him. "If what ends?" "The arrangement." Arrangement. That word settled between us like something rotten. I said, "You think this is transactional?" He leaned back. "Everything is transactional." That's when I understood something clearly. He wasn't worried about Adrian. He was worried about leverage. He believed I had married up, which meant he believed I had married into power, and he didn't like not being the most powerful man in the room anymore. He continued, "I hope you signed something. I'd hate to see you embarrassed if he leaves." Embarrassed, the same word he used when I quit corporate law to start investing independently, the same word he used when I declined a board seat at his company. Embarrassed. I stood up. "I'm not financially dependent on Adrian," I said, calmly. He smiled faintly. "Of course you are." Long pause. He didn't know. He had never asked. He had never cared to know. And that's when I decided something quietly. If they were going to frame me as the opportunist, I would let them, for now. Because 6 months later, my father would host a retirement gala. 300 guests, industry leaders, press, a legacy celebration. And at that gala, he would publicly thank the future of the family. He assumed that future meant my brother. He assumed I'd be seated beside Adrian as decoration. He assumed wrong. What he didn't realize was that the largest silent shareholder in his company was me, and the announcement scheduled that night wasn't the one he thought it was. If you've ever been underestimated by the very people you raised, you already know what that kind of silence feels like. My father built Carter Holdings from a single manufacturing plant into a national logistics empire. He liked to tell that story often, how he started with nothing, how he sacrificed everything, how he carried the family name on his back. He told it so often that people stopped asking who else had been holding weight. 3 years before my engagement, Carter Holdings had quietly entered a dangerous phase. Overexpansion, aggressive debt leverage, risky acquisitions dressed up as innovation. My brother Ethan had pushed most of it. He called it modernization. I called it volatility. I knew because I had analyzed the numbers. Not as a daughter, as an investor. Through a private equity vehicle under a neutral name, I had begun accumulating minority shares when the market dipped. Strategically, gradually. No headlines, no announcements, just filings. At first, it was insurance. If the company collapsed, I could protect my mother's retirement. If my brother miscalculated, I could stabilize it. That was the intention. Then I noticed something else. My father trusted Ethan blindly. Board members were aging, governance was weak, and if someone didn't step in, Carter Holdings would become acquisition bait within 2 years. So I kept buying. By the time I was engaged to Adrian, my holdings, through layered trusts and investment structures, represented the largest non-family voting bloc in the company, more than any external investor, more than any single board ally, more than my brother. My father never noticed, because he never imagined I was capable of it. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter he called strategic in the wrong ways was the only reason his empire hadn't been dismantled by competitors. But I didn't step forward. Not yet. Instead, I let the narrative grow. Family whispers intensified. She locked him down. She finally secured something. She always did know how to position herself. Even my cousin joked that I had leveled up financially. I smiled at all of it, because every underestimation strengthened my advantage. Adrian knew the truth. He found out accidentally when reviewing a quarterly report. He walked into the kitchen one evening holding a tablet. "You own 12%, he said quietly. "Yes." He looked at me for a long moment. "You could control a vote." "I could." "Why haven't you?" "Because timing matters." Timing always matters. 6 months after our engagement, my father announced his retirement gala. Black tie, 300 guests, industry press, investors, legacy speeches. He intended to publicly position Ethan as successor. The narrative was prepared. the press release drafted, the transition symbolic, and I received a formal invitation. Naomi Carter and Adrian Vale. No mention of ownership, no mention of stake, just optics. 3 days before the gala, I received a private email from a board member, concerned. Ethan had proposed a leveraged acquisition that would double corporate debt, a reckless move disguised as innovation. The vote was scheduled the same night as the gala, after speeches, behind closed doors. My father planned to announce succession first, secure applause, secure perception, then secure the vote. He assumed I would sit quietly. He assumed I was there as a guest. He assumed I had no seat at that table. He was wrong. Steady breath. I called an emergency proxy meeting, filed the required documentation, activated voting rights under my holding structure, requested a formal board review before any succession announcement, legally binding, timed precisely. Adrian watched me draft the notice. "You're going to detonate the room," he said. "I'm going to stabilize it." But here's the part that changed everything. 2 days before the gala, my mother called, her voice soft, careful. "You know how much this night means to your father." "I do. He's worked his whole life for this." "Yes. He doesn't need complications." Complications, that was the word she used, for my presence. Cold pause. "You think I'm a complication?" I asked quietly. Silence. Then, "I just don't want you embarrassing us." Embarrassing us. The same word again. That was the moment I knew I wouldn't soften anything, because they weren't afraid of financial instability, they were afraid of public perception, and perception was about to shift. The gala arrived luminous and polished, crystal chandeliers, live quartet, champagne flowing like inevitability. My father stood at the center of it all, commanding, confident, certain. He greeted Adrian warmly, professional, measured. He greeted me with a tight smile, controlled. The speeches began, legacy recounted, achievements highlighted, Ethan praised as visionary. The crowd applauded on cue. Then my father raised his glass, and tonight, he declared proudly, I am honored to introduce the future of Carter Holdings. Applause thundered. Ethan stood, beaming, and that's when the doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough. The corporate legal counsel stepped in, holding a sealed folder, and behind him, 2 independent board members and 1 compliance officer. The room shifted, almost imperceivably. My father's expression flickered, just slightly, because the announcement he had prepared was no longer the only one happening that night, and in less than 5 minutes, the narrative would belong to someone else. The applause hadn't even finished fading when corporate counsel reached the stage. He didn't rush. He didn't apologize. He simply handed my father the sealed folder and said quietly, "There has been a procedural filing." You could feel the room lean forward. My father's smile held for 1 second too long. Then he opened the envelope. His eyes moved, stopped, moved again. The color drained from his face. Behind him, Ethan was still standing, waiting for his moment, waiting for the applause to resume. It didn't. Corporate counsel spoke clearly into the microphone. A formal proxy activation has been submitted by the largest non-executive voting bloc in Carter Holdings. The succession vote must be reviewed before any public declaration. A murmur rolled through the ballroom. Largest non-executive voting bloc. People glanced toward the usual suspects: external investors, private funds, competitors. Then counsel finished the sentence. That bloc is controlled by Naomi Carter. 300 people turned toward me at once. My mother's hand froze around her champagne glass. Ethan's smile collapsed into confusion. My father looked like someone had just rearranged gravity. I didn't stand immediately. I let the silence do its work. because silence is louder than outrage. Finally, I arose, calm, measured, not triumphant, just steady. "I've held minority shares for 3 years," I said clearly. "I increased them gradually to protect this company from over-leveraged risk." I didn't look at Ethan when I said that. I looked at the investors. "There will be no succession announcement tonight. There will be a full governance review." Ethan stepped forward. "You're sabotaging this family." His voice cracked slightly. "This was supposed to be my transition." "It's not a throne, it's a responsibility." The crowd wasn't shocked anymore. They were calculating. Investors leaned in. Board members whispered. Phones were already recording. My father finally found his voice. "You went behind my back." "Yes." "You hid this from your own family." "You never asked." That sentence hurt him, more than the vote, more than the public interaction, because it was true. "You let us believe," my mother started. "That I married for money?" I finished calmly. "I let you believe exactly what you wanted." Long pause. "I invested in this company when it was vulnerable. I protected it when others pushed it toward risk. I let that settle. Not because I wanted control, because I wanted it stable." Ethan shook his head. "You could have told us." "And would you have listened?" I asked. Silence. That was the real answer. Corporate counsel stepped forward again. "The vote will be postponed. Governance review scheduled. Until then, no succession is recognized." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was cautious, respectful, measured. Not for my father, not for Ethan, for stability. My father looked older in that moment, not defeated, just exposed. "You humiliated me," he said quietly. "No, you underestimated me." The gala continued. Music resumed. Conversations restarted. But the hierarchy had shifted permanently. 6 months later, after the governance review, Carter Holdings restructured. Ethan retained a role, under oversight. Debt strategy revised, risk reduced, the company stabilized, and the largest single voting bloc remained mine. My mother never apologized. She tried once. She started with, "We just worried you were dependent." I didn't let her finish. "I was never dependent. You just preferred me smaller." Adrian asked me later if I regretted the public reveal. I thought about the dinner, the whispers, the gold digger comments, the arrangement, and I shook my head. "They needed to see it," I said. Slow, reflective pause. "They called me a gold digger. They thought I married into power. They thought I was protected by someone else's money. They never imagined I was the one holding the leverage all along." If someone ever reduced you to a stereotype because it made them comfortable, let them. Then let the truth correct them. And remember, underestimation is not an insult, it's an opportunity.